Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Butterfly Effect podcast. Today we're going to be talking about a new game. It's a one-off, a bit different from what we usually do. Obviously, a lot of the time we cover choice-based games, but we're doing a walking simulator today, which is kind of in the same world a little bit, very story-driven. So the game in question is What Remains of Edith Finch. Now, I'll be joined today, as always, by Jack.
Buongiorno.
And Jack, just off the bat, tell me how you found out about this game.
I believe it was from your good self that I found out about this game.
You're goddamn right.
I mean, prior to this, I have played two other walking simulators that we might actually cover on the channel if there's sort of a demand for it, and that was Gone Home and Firewatch. And you know what? Like, what I'd say about these games, because they're not for everyone, but if you are sort of story minded and sort of story driven, these games can actually really pack a punch, considering that gameplay wise you don't actually do that much apart from like interact from objects. And it's the exact same with Edith Finch. So it's 2 hours long, and I finished it, and I feel like it was such a sort of a good experience to have something so simplistic yet so powerful. I mean, obviously we'll go into details as we go into the video, but yeah, I was very impressed by this game.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where with video games, we're very much going to cover story-based ones, and there's going to be different levels of gameplay in there. You've got the Quantic Dream ones where there's going to be a lot of button mashing and choices in there. And then there's going to be the lower end ones, which very much fall under the walking simulator category. These games get a lot of backlash because they don't think it should count as a video game. There'll be a lot of 1-star reviews that just come out of them naturally because people just aren't a fan. But for those that get them, are real big fans of it. And What Remains of Edith Finch is a really good example of that, because I've seen very mixed reviews, but the people who do like walking simulators very much like this game. So for me, the first time I played it was being a PS4 user at the time, the PlayStation Plus free games that came out in May 2019. So I've played this game for, just under 2 years ago now, I believe that is. Well, no, over 2 years, isn't it? But yeah, I really enjoyed this game. For a free game to come out, I'm glad I didn't pay extortionate amounts, because I don't think this is a 20 quid game. I got it on the free, and because I got it on the free, I really can't complain. I thought the story was brilliant. So just overall, Jack, what did you think of the game?
Yeah, it's very similar with me. It was on the Xbox Game Pass that I got it, which is, I mean, it's literally at £1 a month. So, you're probably not even paying £1 for it at this point, if as long as you play other games. But yeah, I've seen trailers for this game. I didn't necessarily know what this game was going to be about, apart from someone wandering through a house. And I suppose to sort of go into the plot, it's really about this family, isn't it, that's presumably fallen under some sort of curse. I have only played this once, so it might be the case, or it might be more ambiguous than that, and that it's sort of, that the curse is sort of just an excuse. Yeah, sort of like the premise of it was intriguing, and then you find out sort of as you're going through this game that a lot of these family members, or basically all of them, they've all died in a unique way. But the way the developers have decorated it, it's got it's sort of in a very sort of I'd say it's mainly innocent and charming in the way that they deliver it, very childlike. I suppose we can sort of start to go into each of the stories, can't we, to sort of explain that more thoroughly.
Definitely. They almost remind me of fairy tales, how they're, you mentioned how they're built up in this really innocent way, but the stories behind them are actually really morbid and dark. And it's almost like, we have fairy tales which are, seen in an innocent light where they're read at bedtime. But, in actual fact, a lot of them are about trolls hiding under bridges and, really horrible messages with death in there. So yeah, it's such an interesting game to unravel. I really like the style of it as well, from, the bizarre looking house to the way the writing presents itself on the walls and moves around with the gameplay, to stuff like the music, from Barbara's music box. The whole world I found really capturing when I first played it. I'm not sure if you felt the same way when you were digging through it on your first playthrough.
Yeah, especially like when you sort of say about the writing, like sometimes the writing can be sort of like thrown across the screen as well. Like I know sometimes you sort of look at it and it just fades away, but sometimes the actual letters can get thrown across the screen, and yeah, in terms of its like identity as a game, it's very unique. In comparison to like the other walking simulators that I've done before. It is very much sort of heavy on the voice acting and the dialogue, and you're not necessarily seeing other people, but there's other things going on. Maybe you're reading more, and this just sort of on its own with that these little sort of clinks, sort of like peeping through the peepholes, and you've got like the hidden panels and stuff like that. I don't know. It's sort of so unique, and I suppose it caters to children and adults, especially what you were saying about the themes of sort of the dark themes that lurk beneath. But aesthetically, it's very childlike.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, and the thing you mentioned about the words as well, I have to give a special shout out to just one of my favorite aesthetic bits, which is the letters on the dandelion at the end, and you blow them, and then different letters get like flown across the screen, and I just thought that was a really neat touch. But yeah, so I guess we'll go into the characters. So a big way the game is set up, and the way you unravel it, is that you'll go around this house, finding secret doors, crawling into different bedrooms, which are all sealed up from the front. And yeah, you discover more about that family member in this big house. So yeah, I guess so. So we'll start with Molly, the opening one, where it's very animal based, about Molly being sent to her room without having had dinner. What did you think of this chapter, Jack, as an opener?
Yeah, I thought it was good, and I come back to sort of like the creativity of it, because yeah, you start off as this child, you're wandering around. Obviously, you're seeing the narration, you're sort of eating like gerbil food, and I think you have toothpaste, and you see that the candy's missing, and then you go to this window, and then all of a sudden you're leaping out of it as a cat. And it's just sort of like I think seen another video. I think the term's like magical realism, and like this is when it really goes into full flow. So like you're chasing after this bird as a cat, so you're like walking along branches, along sort of guttering and stuff, and then you capture the bird, and you become this owl, and then you're hunting rabbits. And I think I don't know how to put this. Obviously, you're starting off small, aren't you? You're starting off with a bird, and then it becomes a rabbit, and then it becomes, isn't it? You become a shark, right? And then you're like chasing after a seal, I think. And then you become a snake, and you're going after humans. So like that sense of darkness and that it's slowly etching closer, and it sort of gets more and more bleak and sort of quite disturbing as you go on, which I think was a really nice touch in this story.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's quite a strong way to open up the game, because the majority of it will be Edith walking through the house. But these different chapters, they're almost like little mini games in themselves. Not one of them really repeats. They're very different, which is really refreshing to see. But it also means some are hit and some are miss. So as much as I really like the Molly one, it's not in my top three, I'd say, but it's nearly up there. It then goes to Odin's story, which, to be honest, for me is very forgettable, because apparently it's the shortest one. You complete it in 30 seconds just by going through a real news. So yeah, I don't have much to comment on this one.
Yeah, and it's funny because there's the achievement for this game. It's like complete all stories. This was the one I actually missed. I actually missed it. Like I genuinely looked at the first slide, And I didn't know, there was no indication that to finish this story you had to hit the bumpers. So I sort of was moving the analog stick and nothing was happening, and I was like, "Oh well, that's obviously it." And it was only later on that I found out you had to hit the bumpers to like see all the sort of the different slides. But yeah, I think Odin, isn't he like the very first member of the Finch family or something? And he sort of, it's the background as to how they got to like the little island or whatever to set up the house.
Oh yeah, you've reminded me what it is now about the backstory to do with Norway.
Yeah, that's it. But yeah, you're right. I think this, of all the stories, this one's probably the one that people gravitate least to.
Yeah, of course. And then it goes over to Calvin's story. So the boy who died quite young, and it was the swing level. What did you think of this one?
Again, it's very simple, is it? And like, going back to this whole theme of like he wanted to fly, and again, like sort of the swings going further back, and it's sort of like, is it coming back to as a kid, like when you're a kid and you've got that sort of adventure streak in you, and you're on a swing, and sort of like you do sort of wonder, like, oh wow, I wonder what could happen if I could get over the top and sort of swing round. And I suppose that's what this story does really, but it also says about how he wants to fly, and it ends in a way sort of like he obviously lets go of the swing, doesn't he, and he flies. But what I think this game does well, for the most part, from memory at least, you don't see the death, do you? But you see like sort of like I won't say like a glamorized version, but it's just sort of like he does fly. Obviously, in reality that he's probably let go of the swing and flown off into the rocks and died. You don't see that. You simply see him sort of fly off. So it's got this sort of, again, this sort of innocent and I suppose positive quality to it.
Yeah, it very much leaves the death up to your imagination, even though you clearly know what's happened, whether that's Walter or Gregory's story. The same for this one here with Calvin. It's almost like if like you lose a pet when you're proper young and a parent tries to break it to you in like a really nice way so it doesn't crush you. And it almost feels like every story has that kind of innocent decor around it. But depending on how you look at it, it might be that that's just a way to cover it up from what is actually a really dark, gruesome story. Calvin's story is interesting, not top tier, but enjoyable. I quite like the art of it. It's just, interesting with the swing and everything. You move on after this one to Barbara's story. And do I believe this right? This might be your favorite one, or at least high up there for you, Jack.
Yeah, I think this was the story where I think I first started to see the game. If you get what I mean, it's tough to describe, but the creativity sort of jumped out at me. And it's basically a story where I think Barbara, she's like this sort of Hollywood, like the daughter of Hollywood or something, isn't she? She's famous and stuff, and she's got this sort of unique singing voice or scream that they keep going on about. But the story's told through like this comic book strip, and there are moments where like you're then dropped into the comic book strip and you're like playing as the character, sort of walking around and stuff. You got this sort of Pumpkin Man, I'll call him Pumpkin Man. That's sort of narrating it, almost with this sort of like Tales from the Crypt voice. Maybe people in the UK will get that reference, but yeah, it's sort of like this sort of horrible, creepy voice. And I just thought it was, in terms of that pure imagination, I just thought, wow, like there's so much more to this game than what you'd expect going into it. So I think it probably sits second place for me, this one. What about you? Like, what were your thoughts on Barbara's story?
I'm trying to think. I think it's second or third for sure. I don't know if I, prefer the other one that I'll mention later. But yeah, very good story. I'll start off first with the cons for me. So I think, it can be very sort of laggy. Sometimes the gameplay can be a little jolty in this scene. And sometimes I think the audio doesn't quite connect that well. But I do like the variety of it, especially like you say with the comic strip where everything has like the black outline around it. Where you go down into the basement where your boyfriend Rick scares you, and there's the Michael Myers Halloween theme playing. It's very interesting, and the horror does actually, it's not like Outlast levels of horror, but it does actually work in some ways when you chuck the body over the edge and then you go down the stairs and it's not there. But yeah, really, again, tragic story about Barbara, a child actor who just wanted to be famous again. And what I like as well is the decor from all the different rooms as well. Barbara, it's all Hollywood-esque with a makeup mirror versus, say, Calvin's room, which is all just kitted with, hanging stars and, space helmets. But yeah, this is a very strong story. A lot of effort put into this one. I really rate Barbara's story. So yeah, I guess it ties really nicely as well into the next one, which is Walter's story. And it's really dark if you think about it, because Walter witnesses the sister Barbara's death, and he's just this scarred child who was alone in the house, who just hid forever. And then, he goes into the basement and just lives the same day over, where there's this rumbling that happens every day, and you're just constantly eating tins of peaches. And while you're Edith and you're living in this house, you've got no idea that you've got this Uncle Walter who's living in your basement for decades, which is like a creepy, story in itself. Quite a short one, but really powerful, I thought. Jack, what did you think of the Walter story?
Yeah, I did like it. Isn't this the one as well where they really drum home the fact that he was nervous to leave the basement because of the family curse, because he was aware that sort of, members of the family would ultimately die, and then he ends up leaving because he's sort of like, sod this, I need to go and live my life. And then he drops down, and then he ends up on this railway track, and then just gets hit by a train. And that's the story.
Yeah,
this.
He's scared of the rumbling for decades, because he's in there for 40 years, I think it is. And he hears the rumbling and he's scared of it. He thinks it's the curse. And then it turns out he was just digging next to a train track. And that was all he was scared of for 4 years. And like you say, it leaves this very ambiguous ending, whether the curse is real or not. It never explains it. But this kind of almost leans in the favor of maybe they were just imagining it, and his fear put his life on hold for no apparent reason whatsoever, which I thought was really powerful and dark.
Yeah, and I suppose the ambiguity lends the sort of the player to sort of make a choice for themselves, doesn't it? Is in terms of whether it was a curse or whether it's something that they fashioned for themselves and they're just, an unbelievably unfortunate family. We don't know.
Yeah, of course, that's exactly it. And I think you just have to feel for Walter, because he's obviously seen his sister get, brutally murdered, I guess, and just hid in this room. And then he's just been hiding in a basement for ages. And the moment he stands up to his fears, he talks about whether, he doesn't mind if he lives a year, a month, or a week. And then, it turns out he lives in 10 seconds because, that's the end of his story. So there's almost like this is halfway through the game, and there's like a midpoint where you visit the different cemeteries. So what did you think of this little pause in the game, Jack?
Again, nice pace changer. Obviously, you've been doing the stories, and while the stories have been great, I feel like if you just endlessly sort of churn out these stories, then you might lose some of them. So I think this is a welcome break. And in terms of the aesthetic, house alone, it's a very strange looking house. It just sort of continues upwards, doesn't it? But then you've got this whole cemetery sequence, and you've got pets. You've got like a pet cemetery as well, haven't you? For all the pets that they've had over the years, and it just really emphasizes the amount of lives that have been lost, be it due to a curse or not. And you really sort of see at this point, wow, they're really sort of pushing the darkness here, and you sort of start to realize what you're playing as a game.
That's it. And I really like the unique touches of all the different cemeteries as well. So it's like I said to you earlier, someone in a comment that I found mentioned that Walter's grave rock has a hole that you can peep through, and you can see a cave-like interior with a miniature man staring at the ocean, which leans a lot into Walter's story. It's so there are little intricate details in this game which I find are stunning. And yeah, they're all there's loads of different ones as well. So you look at all the graves. For all the old ones you look at, like Calvin, I believe, I think there's like a space helmet on it. And then it hints a lot for the future graves. So there's, other family members' graves there, like Lewis's, and I think his name's Milton. And it, has all these different sort of tropes. So it kind of almost gives you a little, until dawn totem, if you like, as to what's going to happen with them. But yeah, a really nice break afterwards. So afterwards, we go ahead to Sam's story, who I think might be your uncle. It's difficult to say because this family tree is so messed up that some people die young, some people die old, and it's really difficult to see who actually is who when the whole thing's just looking through a past looking glass. But you go on to Sam's story next, who actually I think is your granddad, because he takes your mum out hunting, I believe it is anyway. So yeah, Jack, what did you make of this story then with the hunter Sam?
I'd say the death in this one got me the most because it come out of nowhere. Like I didn't expect it. It starts off like you sort of, and again, like the variety in the gameplay here, I really like. I think it's something I probably haven't mentioned up to this point too much, but each story's got their own thing. Like you got the comic book strip, you got the swing, and obviously in Molly's story, you've got the various animals and the slowly sort of increasing sense of threat. In this one, you're just at a nature wildlife place taking pictures. And again, sort of you get to this point where I think it's Sam and Molly, whoever he's with anyway, they find this deer up on this rock. And anyway, I can't remember. Does it just collapse or is it already dead? Or so? I don't know. But she goes up there for a picture. He then leaves the camera running, ready to take a picture, and goes up to join. Anyway, this deer isn't dead, and it ends up kicking out, and it kicks him off this obviously great height from this rock, and the picture just sort of grabs it at that moment. It's like he's in midair falling, and it just stayed there like that. And I thought, God, wow! Like first of all, it took me by complete surprise. But it's almost as if like even though you're dealing with dark stories, because they're so light in tone for the most part, even then it was still a surprise to me at this point when like he got kicked off.
Yeah, definitely. It was quite a bittersweet story because it actually makes you feel really sorry for Dawn, your mum, who's a little girl in the story who's forced to go out hunting. She clearly doesn't want to be there. So yeah, she is forced to kill this animal. She is the one who shoots the deer, and yeah, it's a really weird justice because the father who made you do it, who wants you to survive, and it almost ties back into this curse thing, how he thinks you need to be able to hunt to survive, and then Dawn's having it drummed into her that this is the lifestyle she needs. Yeah, the deer ends up kicking the dad off, and it's quite a dark story itself. I really enjoyed the variety again. This is the photographer level where you have to take different photos to advance the story. Yeah, no, very interesting one, to be honest. It's quite a top tier one, I'd say. But the one it moves on to next, Gregory, who now this is for me probably the story that might be second. It's silver or bronze versus Barbara, and I'm not sure which one takes the cake. I don't know about you, Jack, but I really liked this little chapter here, as dark as it is. What did you make of it?
I really did, yeah. There's a lot going in this one, because you're playing this kid, aren't you, in a bathtub, so you can imagine like how he ultimately dies. But it's done in such like a fantastical way that it makes it worse in a weird way, because you're not seeing what happens, but it in a way it makes it worse because it leaves you to your imagination. But you got the like these sort of toys. I think you got like a frog and a duck. You got like little sort of like the Gregory, sort of like the little letters on the side of the bath, and I'm pretty sure in this one you have like this sort of classical music that's playing, and I don't know, it was just very immersive. You have the mum that comes on, like sort of turn the taps off, and then you ultimately put the taps back on again, and then next thing you know, you're thrust into sort of the frog, and you can sort of see the perspective in the bath of the frog. You sort of going around seeing all the different toys and things, but you ultimately get sort of sucked down the plug hole, and that's where it ends. And I thought, it's the way they sort of delicately handle the deaths, as it were, and they leave it to your imagination. It's so well done, and I think this one is probably up third place for me.
Yeah, definitely. I thought it's brilliant because, like you say, you've got the classical music. I've just looked it up. It's Tchaikovsky Waltz of the Flowers, I believe. That's playing the whole time, and the sequence is just beautiful. It's almost very Toy Story-esque, where the toys start having a life of their own. And the whole thing, like I say again, is really dark because the whole thing is narrated by this letter from the father to the mum saying, "Oh, it's not your fault the kid died." And then it mentions a lot about how this kid, Gregory, sees a lot of things that aren't there and how he lives in his imagination a lot, which is like a recurring theme for some of the characters throughout this game. And it, begs the question as well, about the curse. Maybe it's just something of their imagination. But yeah, I thought this, this little chapter very interesting, especially as it just expands. It starts off, like you say, in the bathtub where you're just jumping around and, like unlocking more toys to get higher. And then it ends up being this thing where you're underwater and you're imagining life under there. And a really interesting way to dress up this, what is practically a very traumatic thing in a baby's death, getting drowned in a bathtub. It's very dark, but very powerful. So next we've got Gus's story, so the kid in a mohawk. Very brief. You're flying a kite. What did you make of this story, Jack?
I think in terms of this is probably like one of the lower tier. I mean, they're all good stories, but it's probably one of the lower tier ones for me. Yeah, you're sort of flying this kite round, and there's a wedding going on, isn't there? And I think all of the guests ultimately go into the tent, but Gus stays outside. And then there's this sort of like hurricane that comes and it sort of starts to pick up a lot of the seats and sort of just general debris that's sort of in the area. And obviously maybe it hits him or something, or it ends up sort of taking him up into the hurricane. I don't know what sort of the actual death is for that one, but yeah, it's, it was a decent enough story. What about your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree. A low tier, quite a short one. The only plus I can really say for it is, more variety again, and the fact that I really do think it is beautiful the way the poem throughout the story is almost projected by the words and letters in the sky, which you can interact with the kite. Very aesthetic, but not much more than that, to be honest. Afterwards it moves on to what is probably the second shortest story in Milton. So very much a kid, I feel this death hits the family very hard, maybe because it's very recent, but there's a recurring theme throughout this game where it talks about how Edie, or Dawn, I believe, is very much looking for this child, and there's still very much the belief that this child isn't actually dead, because this is probably the one story where it doesn't really talk about a death, but how a kid goes missing. What did you think of this little brief moment in the game where you climb up into the tower and look at your brother?
So yeah, I really did like this bit. I mean, I know we've sort of covered the hidden panels, but you're very much indoors, aren't you? Where you've got this segment where you do go outdoors, out onto the roof, and you're still climbing upwards. And again, sort of in terms of that sense of adventure and that sort of exploring this sort of old sort of abandoned house, this is a really good bit. And yeah, you go in, and it's the one with the paintings, isn't it? So you sort of see this story where it's sort of the all the cards are sort of flicked, and you sort of see this sort of the story sort of pan out, and he ultimately disappears. Very nice story. Again, I think this one where what makes it unique is what you've said already, like the sense of mystery, like we don't actually know what's happened to him.
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, like you say, you go through the flip book and it depicts him as painting his own doorway and then kind of bowing before leaving, which is a very nice nod to him because clearly this kid's obsessed with, like, I think it's magic, I believe. I think there's a very big magic theme throughout this his room. So yeah, it's very interesting. It's almost like we don't know what's happened to him, so we're gonna make another nice fairy tale-esque ending, and this is how he went. But like I say, he actually still might be alive. There's no confirmed ending to this one. So yeah, just a very interesting little tiny chapter we have there. So then we move on to Lewis Jack. Now, personally, it's the second to last story, I believe, the penultimate one. It talks about your brother Lewis. Are you the same as me in saying that this is my favourite chapter of the game?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, yes, to go into it. Why is that then?
God, wow, there's so many things. I think that, I mean, obviously it covers this story, Lewis. He's working some sort of like factory, isn't he? And very mundane, very monotonous job. He's got like sort of a guillotine. He's cutting the heads off the fish, moving it on. Sort of very basic thing. And I suppose, like, you know, sort of it, as it's sort of covered already, they're very rich in imagination, these children. And it's no different with Lewis, who sort of imagines that, you know, ultimately life's got to go better for him, and that maybe he sort of needs to go, he sort of goes somewhere else. Because I think, no, sorry, tell it, he's talking to his therapist, isn't he? And yeah, he sort of has to go to this place where like he's the king, and you sort of, you know, you start off and like you're still cutting the fish, like, which is really good, like that you can combine the two things in the story. But you're playing as this king, and you actually get choices in this as well, which I quite like. I think one of the choices, like, do you want it to be a beautiful prince or a handsome queen or something like that? And you can like direct the little ship that he's on to go elsewhere. And but it ultimately comes to this sequence, and obviously by this point you know that it's going to end in a death. And it's there's such a level of I can't think of the word for it, but that you're walking towards sort of the queen and the crowd's cheering, but you know that it's going to be a bad end. So you're walking up there, you think, you know, it's going to be about to put the crown on, but then in like sort of as a parallel to what he's been doing as his job, you then have this sequence where he bows his head down and then has his head cut off, like obviously the fish that he was working with. And it's just this, you know it's going to end badly, but you've still got like this hope and this level of sort of uplifting spirit when he's walking through, the music's playing, everyone's cheering you and stuff. And it's just, yeah, like obviously a very tragic story. I think this is the one perhaps they gave the most love to. Maybe it was because it was towards the end, I don't know. But yeah, I have sort of very high opinions of this story. Is there anything that I've missed that, you know, maybe you could add on that?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, what I will say is that the 3 people I know who've played this game, including myself, rate this as their favorite chapter. And I think there's so many reasons why. I think, you know, firstly, from the narration standpoint, how the whole story is told through Lewis's counselor writing a condolence letter to the mother, Dawn, about Lewis, how he did all these therapy sessions. One thing that I think really is, you know, a factor to why I like this chapter so much is probably from a personal point of view about how relevant it is, in the sense that I played this game a year after graduating university. And Lewis's story is very much about someone who graduated from a college, has come home, and for the first time, I guess his life lacks structure. And he's almost dealing with, like, you know, how harsh life is. So he loses himself, in his imagination. And, he's clearly, his room and style is very kitted up with bongs and marijuana leaves. So this guy's clearly miserable post university, which, is a lot of is a big deal with what students actually do go through when they come back home and they don't have that structure and they get chucked out into the real world for the first time. So yeah, very hard hitting story, as I'm very much in the same boat, but never to this extent. Like you mentioned, I thought the gameplay was absolutely brilliant. The multitasking with working in the cannery while living in your imagination, while you have to cut the fish heads, but that actually has a part of the game as well. So he almost sort of sees his work as a video game, just to make his life a little less mundane. And then the narrator, who in my opinion sounds very much like Mina in Last Stop, which Annapurna Interactive published both games, Last Stop and Edith Finch. But yeah, and then towards the end, very dark ending, how he clearly loses himself in this world that he's created in his imagination so much that he wants to be in that instead. And the only way to do that is to leave the current world. And he clearly beheads himself in the cannery. And the whole story is so beautifully written, yet so dark, as they all are. But yeah, I just thought it was absolutely fantastic. One of the best stories in the game for sure. Yeah, loved it. Then I guess it goes on to Edith's story, where I guess it's the final chapter, just about how she leaves the house. What did you make of this one? Or unless you have any more points to follow on about Lewis, feel free to mention those as well.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose quickly, all of the stories, but especially Lewis's, I think it really is a tribute to how much you can get. I mean, how long is that sequence? It can't be any more than maybe 5 minutes. How much emotion you can get from the player and how much relatability you can get. We sort of criticise these other games where there's not enough relatability. The story just doesn't really pull you in. And I suppose, like Lewis's, it really is a tribute sort of to the writers and the developers to create something that's so hard-hitting in such a short amount of time, which, again, you could magnify that to the whole game in itself, really. So yeah, I suppose that was my final point on Lewis's. In terms of Edith's, because you find out that you essentially abandon the grandmother, don't you? You go off with the mum. And, me personally, I don't know if this is sort of something that I missed, but I genuinely thought that I was playing as Edith Finch throughout the game. Mainly because obviously she's narrating it, and I think, of course, obviously the title is What Remains of Edith Finch. So you think when someone in your family dies, you go there, sort of thing, to see what belongings and that sort of you can sort of sort out and work out what you want to take. So the whole twist at the end, that she fell pregnant and she actually sort of succumbed to this quote unquote family curse as well, was a bit of a twist for me. And I suppose it's fitting as well because obviously she's a member of the family. If you're going to carry on this whole narrative that each of them die, then I suppose she has to. But it was so nicely done at the end where the camera sort of pans back and you see Edith's grave and it's clearly her son, and you then sort of see why he was holding a flower at the start of the game, when you're on the boat. I just thought, as a twist goes, it's not absolutely groundbreaking, but it was just a nice little sense of misdirection at the end it was sort of welcome on my part. Was it the same for you, or?
Yeah, definitely. So I kind of clocked on early on what the twist could have been. So when you finish Walter's story, she does mention something along the lines of, and all that's left is me, or you as well. So, clearly she's narrating to another member of the family, and you're wondering who this is. Then later on, it reveals that she's pregnant. So you just sort of think she's going through the house pregnant, maybe giving the family one last glimpse before she gives birth to her kid. And then, obviously at the end, you realize that you're playing as the son. and the whole game's almost like a recap, I guess, maybe. Yeah, quite a welcome twist. I've seen a lot of backlash reviews of the ending about how it doesn't make sense, how it's far-fetched, but I don't know, not a groundbreaking twist, but one that very much was fitting to the game. So yeah, I don't really have any complaints with it. It's not a game that, probably had the ambition to completely wow us with the ending. I think it was more about the story and the journey anyway. So yeah, I think, I just was very much one of those players that appreciated that alone. And I didn't really need like an absolute groundbreaking ending. But yeah, one of the points that you mentioned to when you first finished the game is you mentioned how much you liked the touch with the credits. So yeah, I was hoping you'd elaborate on that.
Yeah, so again, like it just goes to show like the amount of effort and love that sort of the developers are putting in, but like you're then starting to see the developers, they've clearly got pictures of themselves as children. And again, obviously that ties in because this whole, well, I suppose there are, it's not all about children, but I think, it's the basis of the game. It follows sort of like the tragedy of sort of these children's deaths, albeit there's a couple of adult ones in there as well. But yeah, just sort of again that symmetry. They didn't have to do that. They could have just had a black screen and white credits rolling down, but they didn't. They almost sort of merged their world as sort of when they were children into the world of Edith Finch. And I just thought, yeah, it was sort of a very appropriate and sort of a very touching way as to how to wrap up the whole thing in general.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So one thing I wanted to mention, we've very much praised the game. Were there any big negatives in there for you that stops this game from getting an absolute 10 out of 10 for you, Jack?
I honestly can't think of anything. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and give it a 10 out of 10. I'm trying to go back. I mean, what I would say is that maybe this is a case on me, really. Maybe I should have paid more attention to the narration as I was walking through the house. Maybe they could have stripped it back a little bit when you're walking through the house, because I felt like I was a bit overwhelmed. Because it's such a busy house, isn't it? There's pots and pans and books. There's piles of things everywhere. So I was sort of looking through them. I wasn't necessarily paying attention to the narration all the time. Obviously, I was in like the little stories. But when wandering through the house, like the whole detail that you picked out about, her being pregnant and all these other things that sort of are crucial to the ending. Like I didn't get that at all. So maybe they could have stripped back on the narration, like as you're walking through the house a little bit, but equally that could be on me as well. So I find it difficult to criticize the game. Really, you know what you're getting. It's 2 hours. It's a walking simulator, and they do very well in terms of the hard hitting tragedy of this family and how it all sort of pans out.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'd have to completely agree with that. There are some flaws in some areas about, the game engine, isn't the best. So there are, it doesn't run as smooth as you'd want it to. There are some audio and narration issues at times. But yeah, to be honest, a very enjoyable experience. I think it's, as we've mentioned with The Last Stop, for example, it's very difficult to give a game of this caliber and genre an absolute perfect score when you want to compare them to other games that aren't hitting those exact grades. But honestly, Edith Finch, I completely recommend it. If you're someone who doesn't really care for gameplay and you just want a nice, relaxing experience, even if you've got maybe like a friend who's not into video games because they think it's all going to be about skill or action-based shooting, a game like Edith Finch is a really interesting game to show that person, to show that all video games don't have to be like that. Some games are pretty much just like, interactive movies you just walk through, and, just press a few of the buttons along the way. I was very welcome to that. And Edith Finch, although, very similar to Firewatch and Gone Home, I'm unsure which one my favorite one is, but it's definitely top tier for walking simulators. I thought it was such an enjoyable experience, and even if you're uncertain about playing the game, if you see it on a sale and it's like only for a few pounds or dollars or whatever, I really recommend picking this game up because it's such a unique experience and one that I found really enjoyable to play.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, I couldn't really add anything onto that really, apart from honestly just echoing everything you just said. So, I mean, is I suppose a good time to wrap up.
Yeah, of course. So, before we do, we hope you enjoyed this video. And also, if you have played this game, let us know what your favorite chapters were, because everyone that I know who's played this game says Lewis, and it seems like Barbara and Gregory are very close to that. Maybe even Molly actually. But yeah, I'd want to know what your favorite chapters were. If you absolutely hated the game, we're probably going to do more videos on Edith Finch in the future. So yeah, very much get your comments in. Let us know what you thought. But yeah, okay. So yeah, this has been a fun one to cover something a little different, Edith Finch. But yeah, Jack, thank you very much for joining.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And yeah, we'll see you in the next video, guys. So thank you very much for joining.